Hello again. My name's still Steve Flanders, and this is the number 14 edition of 15 Minutes to Save America. Now, I'm talking about local community moral self-government and the way we're going to form together under that. It's good to keep in mind that we are a small r republic. We are not a democracy, but we are a small r republic, and there is no ethnic component to our republic. I mean, at one point there was this 3/5 clause that's been superseded. There isn't one. That's why all people that come here can be Americans. I welcome that. Most people do. And we can expect, given the modern demographics and the vast majority of people that want to come here are not European, we're going to see a lot of new kinds of communities forming if we get back to being self-governing small r republics within the larger republic. I think we can be looking at Chinese, Hindu, Muslim, certainly some Christian and traditional type cultures will re-emerge. You'll see pagan, libertarian, socialist, anarchist. Who knows? Some of them might even make some of this stuff work. I would look forward to some of the anarchists and libertarians I've heard being free to pursue it as far as they can and see what good they can do with it. Because like I say, they might make it work. Now, with all this ethnic diversity, we're going to have a great deal of ideological diversity too. And so along with, allowing socialism and anarchism, we're going to, when we get back to local community moral self-government, we're going to make it to where people can make laws against pornography. People can make laws against flag burning and sedition, blasphemy, sodomy, same-sex marriage, transgenderism. On the other side, people can form together in communities and legalize all those things. Maybe even ban teaching that they're wrong. Okay, the federal government wouldn't have anything to say about it. It would be up to the locals in their local community. And like I said before, the competition would be to see who could produce the best lifestyle. The ideal with this local community moral self-government is these self-governing communities at peace with each other. Maybe we'll play some pretty good football games, but we're not going to be waging war. But these communities are big enough to be sustainable and yet small enough that an individual feels some real powers of sovereignty. The individual feeling that sovereignty and being involved with all these issues of self-government, their moral thinking will naturally tend to elevate. This is just what happens. This is the great blessing of liberty. It causes us to be better people. And I don't think any other form of government, there's a lot of different forms that local community moral self-government can have. But I don't think any other form can get that kind of elevation in our moral thinking. Even in places that are very tolerant of sexual foibles, having everything come back to their own pocketbooks and having everything paid for within their own community, traditional values will start to emerge. They may not dominate, but having children in wedlock in stable families is just the most efficient way to do it. Doing things any other way is somewhat less efficient, and it would show up much more dramatically if we had local community moral self-government. In all of this, the individual within the community, the self-governing community, this active citizen becomes much more aware of why to be moral. And this is far better than some sort of, legalistic religion or moral code that everybody has to meet to be accepted. This is much more along the lines of trying to clean the inside of the cup. People sincerely trying to be moral so that they can make things work well in their hometown where they can see the problems that arise with immorality. Now, to back this point up, I've got 3 quotes I'm going to read because this, this is a real big point. I'll wind it up to the biggest point. And that is, the first one is from Thomas Jefferson. This is a letter he wrote January 5th, 1824. This is shortly before he died. So this is some of his last thoughts, some of the last thoughts of a man brilliant in government, that some of his last thoughts about the best form of government. And this is a letter to Major John Cartwright. Quote, my own state has gone so far in its premier ébauche. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's a French word, means sketch. Okay. But is now proposing to call a convention for amendment. Among other improvements, I hope they will adopt the subdivision of our counties into wards. The former may be estimated at an average of 24 square miles. The latter would be about 6 miles square each and would answer to the hundreds of your Saxon Alfred. And each of these might be, first, an elementary school, second, a company of militia with its officers, third, a justice of the peace and constable, fourth, each ward should take care of its own poor, fifth, their own roads, sixth, their own police, seventh, elect within themselves one or more jurors to attend the courts of justice, and eighth, give into their folk house their votes for all functionaries reserved to their election. Each ward would thus be a small republic within itself, and every man in the state would thus become an acting member of the common government, transacting in person a great portion of its rights and duties, subordinate indeed, and yet important, and entirely within his competence. The wit of man cannot devise a more solid basis for a free, durable, and well-administered republic. To echo that statement, let me take a moment to figure out my computer here and get to this other entry I want to read, which is two of them from de Tocqueville in Democracy in America. First one, quote, it is important to appreciate that in general, men's affections are drawn only in directions where power exists. Patriotism does not long prevail in a conquered country. The New Englander is attached to his township, not so much because he was born there, as because he sees the township as a free, strong corporation, of which he is part and which is worth the trouble of trying to direct. It often happens in Europe that governments themselves regret the absence of municipal spirit, for everyone agrees that municipal spirit is an important element in order and tranquility, but they do not know how to produce it. In making municipalities strong and independent, they fear sharing their social power and exposing the state to risks of anarchy. However, if you take power and independence from a municipality, you may have docile subjects, but you will not have citizens. And in a similar quote in the same book, from the same book, quote, in the restricted sphere within his scope, he learns to rule society. He gets to know those formalities without which freedom can advance only through revolutions, and becoming imbued with their spirit, develops a taste for order, understands the harmony of powers, and in the end accumulates clear, practical ideas about the nature of his duties and the extent of his rights, unquote. These two men both echoed it with G.K. Chesterton, a writer of some note in the early part of the 20th century. His idea of distributism, and their motto was 3 acres and a cow, and everybody being on their own little piece of land in small, locally self-governing communities. And he noting that it's difficult to see how to get something like that in place. But once it's in place, it's extremely secure. He likened it to, imagine a brick floating in a rainbow of bricks above your head. Seems impossible until you start recognizing he's talking about a Roman arch. Now, a Roman arch is difficult to build. You want to build a regular door, an easier doorway, get 2 stones and put one over the top. Voila, a doorway. But a Roman arch doesn't make any sense until it's completed. But once it's completed and all those bricks form a rainbow, the power of nature strengthens that structure. Gravity tends to pull it down. It strengthens against itself over time, which is why we've got Roman arches still standing 2,000 years later. Similarly, a structure of local community moral self-government, hard to put together, it's precious, we need to get back to our Constitution, not try and think about how we can maybe do that, getting lucky down the line in the face of this huge oligarchy we're fighting. But once it's in place, the people's love of liberty and self-determination will be the force of nature keeping it in place, as it would have in this country until we got really seduced and deceived out of it. Now, the final statement I want to make is, it's really the crux of this whole presentation, the whole project. And that is, the founding fathers, pretty much to a man, and some of them wrote very articulately, that a free, self-governing people as ourselves cannot maintain freedom without being morally minded, without having morality and a religion. I see, and that's the gist of this whole project, is the reverse side of that coin is equally true and equally vitally important. Only if people that feel freedom and feel the powers of self-government will see why to be moral and why to try to be moral and upstanding citizens. Subjective people don't feel that way. They see the wisdom in being apathetic and just getting away with what they can. And that then, the morality that gets induced in us when our government is set up the way it's defined and supposed to be set up, is then when I go into the subject of local community moral self-government versus Christian nationalism. I'm a Christian. I recognize there's a lot of us are very concerned and want to see a form of revival of some form. And there's calls for Christian nationalism, which I guess would be imposing some sort of doctrine and forced attendance or something out of the federal government. I say no, 1,000 times. No, this is not going to work. This is not what formed us in the first place. I see that the long-term connection between the United States of America and the gospel of Jesus Christ is because of the power of local communities' moral self-government. In exercising those powers, generation after generation, people began to look at themselves, try to become more moral people. As they wrestled with the problems of being moral, they came up against the power of sin. That's when the gospel started making a whole bunch of sense to them. And so every generation, that connection with Jesus Christ got renewed and the gospel got renewed. The same thing can happen again, but we've got to have confidence in freedom. We've got to actually believe that freedom is the path to revival. And all these others, basically the proof of that is what happened after we lost the powers of self-government in the 1930s. From that point on, our passion for and drive for moral self-government started dissolving. It no longer made any sense. Everything was being taken care of out of D.C. We didn't need to do anything to resist it, and we accepted all these other things that degraded us. In the next edition, in the next number 15, I'm going to go into the constitutional limits to local community moral self-government and why that would fit in. It all makes great sense within the context of the Constitution. Well, that's it this time. I'll see what the time looks like. Thanks for watching. Once again, be sure and share and follow, and more than anything, share. If you can subscribe, if you can tell your friends about it, fine, but sharing it is the way we can really spread ideas today. It's such a tremendous opportunity, and it's not taken advantage of nearly as much as I think it should be. This segment is going to be mercifully short tonight. Once again, the one to go to is, if you want to read ahead, is lifeinafascist.country.blogspot.com/how-and-202/how-save-america.html. This latest one, which is included as a link in that other, is LCMSG.html. Once again, I'll review more later. Talk to you later.